Hello everyone and welcome back to Mikey Reacts. Today this is not so much of a reaction video, but it's more of an information video. I did a recent video with my fiancé Natasha where we reacted to the Star Spangled Banner for the first time, you know, as you've never heard it before. And the reason I'm doing this video is because I got two really mixed comments on that video. One was from people, just a bit of backstory. During the video, obviously I've already watched it and I know the story because I've studied the history of it, but Tasha had no idea. So during the video, I did speak and I did tell Tasha that there are certain inaccuracies, not in the actual historic facts of what happened at Fort McHenry, but in what the gentleman was saying and preaching in this video. And if you want to have a look at that video, you can find the video on my channel. Nonetheless, I got quite a few really positive comments from a lot of you guys who said, you know, wow, you really know your history. That's really impressive. And they did acknowledge that actually the facts that were given in this video were totally inaccurate. Not totally inaccurate, but largely inaccurate. And but the reason I'm making this video specifically is because I got a lot of angry messages from people who just assumed that I was talking from a British perspective. I've got a lot of people saying, oh, you must be reading British history. Well, I want to reiterate one point, guys. In British schools, we do not teach about the Battle of Fort McHenry. It was not a defining moment in our history. It was a defining moment in the history of the United States, because that is the moment for the second time that the United States, the people of the United States held their own against the British, repelled the British, and the flag still flew. And that is such an important part of American history because it solidifies the creation of the United States as a brand new country, independent from any foreign rule. And that is why the story itself is an incredibly heroic story and a very important one in American history. However, it's not taught in British schools because we have other history, such as obviously so many different major conflicts that have happened on the European continent over the last let's say 1,000 years. So we learn a lot about that. In fact, we even learn a lot about American history, not in terms of as far back as the Revolution, but more modern history. We talk about things like the Cold War, very much about the Cold War, which obviously had a huge impact on the European continent with the Iron Curtain and such. And also, I learned a hell of a lot about the Great Depression, which was very interesting because, and again, you know, it is American history, but it's also world history, because what happened, the Great Depression, when the stock markets in the United States in I think from 1928 was it, and then all throughout the 30s, basically affected the stock market globally. And you know, although the United States suffered a really major depression, it really did have a ripple effect to Western Europe and other markets such as China, which China wasn't as connected to, well, no, actually was very well connected to the United States at the time, but the stock market wasn't as it is now in China, so it wasn't that affected economically. But that's a whole different story, because their whole sort of business mindset in China is mostly export, but that's fine. So I'm doing this video just to set a few facts straight. I'm not looking at this whole thing from a British perspective. I'm looking at it from a historical and factual perspective, totally. And I would like just to let you know that my two main sources are the Smithsonian Museum, their published work online, and the American Battlefield Trust. So these are two American sources. There's nothing British about these. So there's a few facts that I really want to talk about here, that if you have watched the last video, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's so many inconsistencies. The first thing I want to talk about is that the man who's speaking in that very famous video is a pastor. He's a priest. He's a preacher. He's not a historian or an author of anything. That's not to take away from anything he said, because actually the way he spoke was he was a great orator, a great storyteller, and it invoked a lot of emotion. And I think that was the idea behind the speech, but it was not a factually correct speech. The first thing that I would like to point out is that he referred to America as the colonies. This was, the Battle of Baltimore was 1814, so during the War of 1812, and that will give it, that'll make it about 40 years after about almost 50 years after the American Revolution, the Revolutionary War, where America gained their independence in 1776. So they weren't the colonies anymore. By 1814, what used to be the colonies was now already the United States, with Congress, with democracy, with everything that the United States has today in terms of legal structure, with a fully written constitution. Obviously, things will be added later on, and that, you know, all the way up until very recently. So it was already the United States. So he calls them the colonies. They weren't the colonies. That's the first thing. The second thing is, we talk about the entire British war fleet off the coast of Baltimore. That wasn't the case. I believe the numbers are estimated to be between 16 and 20, as per the American Battlefield Trust, which I'm on right now. Sorry if I'm looking down, it's because I am actually on my laptop just to confirm the facts as I say them. So that's the first important thing. So during the battle, the other thing he mentioned was that it was a largely civilian. First of all, he called it Fort Henry, which is not Fort Henry, it's Fort McHenry. He also says that it was a largely civilian fort. That isn't the case. The fort was manned by 1,000 men from the United States military, and the fort's purpose was primarily to defend from attack, and primarily from the British. And that's why it was situated in such a vital point in that bay. And those forces were led by George Armistead. So it was a fighting force, and there were genuinely good fortifications, cannons, and all of those things. So it was 1,000 men, and the British actually had 5,000 men in their navy. So, 5,000 men, ships and land forces, which landed down further down the coast and engaged in other skirmishes, and those were led by Alexander Cochrane. So, yeah, it was not a civilian fort. There were civilians in the fort, but it was a predominantly military fort. And again, this is from the American Battlefield Trust, not British history. This is purely American history, written by Americans. There's also a very interesting thing here, and I may show you this actually. So you can see here, Maryland, September 13th, 1814, that was the Battle of Baltimore, which is spoken about here. You have two leaders that you can see right here, so on the American side and the British side, and then you have total forces engaged, so 5,000 British troops, 1,000 United States troops, and you see how it's called United States, not colonies, because it was already the United States. And estimated casualties. Now, you see these numbers here that I'm saying. So just so you understand, casualties include anything from death, so killed in action, KIA, to missing in action, MIA, wounding, and general injury. So anything that takes a soldier out of the battle and being able to effectively fight is counted as a casualty. So in theory, all 28 of these people could have just suffered broken toes and couldn't run anymore. I mean, that wouldn't stop any man fighting, but you know what, you understand what I mean. That's just theoretical. But the official numbers, as you can see here, is 28 United States casualties and 1 United Kingdom casualties. The interesting thing is that casualty from the UK was only a wounding, that was not a KIA. The United States suffered 4 deaths, so 4 KIA and 24 wounded, none missing, all accounted for. So that is very much against what has been told in this story that we watched recently, me and Tasha, where it said that the flagpole was held up, or was leaning, but held up by the piled body of patriots. It wasn't. It was, first of all, not possible. There was only 4 deaths. Estimated, so if we take estimated, it's not going to be a wild number and be 100. If the estimation is wrong, it could be 2 and it could be 10. You know, it's not going to be anything wild, which is, guys, it's a great thing. You know, I don't know why anyone would want to say, no, way more died than that. No, the fort was defended well. The fortifications were good. The men who were there were very well trained and under the great leadership of George Armistead. So only 4 men died, and that is a great success. That is successful. That is a great thing to be proud of. The only reason the United Kingdom only suffered one injury or one wounding was because they were on hard to hit targets on ships, miles, well not miles, but hundreds hundreds of meters or kilometers out of shore, whereas the Fort McHenry was a fixed position on the coast, and that was easy to train all guns on. That's the only reason why the United States suffered more deaths and more casualties. So you can see here, these are the official numbers, estimated casualties, estimated. This is not just by the American Battlefield Trust, which you can see here, and you can see the website right here. It is also verified on the Smithsonian Museum page as well. So there's quite a lot to unpack here. So during this battle, actually, the British actually did land troops in an attempt to infiltrate the fort, and that was very unsuccessful. That did not work. They were not killed in action, of course, because it would have been recorded here, but they were repelled, and they could not make it to the fort successfully. So another thing is, so for the bombardment lasted 27 hours. There was 1,500 cannonballs, shells, and rockets fired, both sides combined. And the interesting thing is, and this is the very interesting thing, so on September 14th, the morning after the bombardment, obviously, as we know, the lyrics of the song of the Star Spangled Banner, oh say does that Star Spangled Banner yet wave? Yes, it did. So the thing is, the flagpole had been tattered a little bit, and the flag itself had been largely destroyed, but it was not held up by the body of patriots. It says right here, so on September 14th, that morning, the American defenders lowered their battered storm flag, which was the the flag that we know, the large Star Spangled Banner. You know, the original one was not actually the Star Spangled Banner, the flag that was waving during the bombardment. The American patriots, the heroes of this day, realized that they did not want that to happen to the flag. So during the bombardment, they did actually raise a smaller flag. So September 14th, the morning that the American defenders lowered their battered storm flag, the smaller flag, and raised the large 30-foot by 42-foot garrison flag that Major Armistead ordered a year earlier from the local flag maker, Mary Pickersgill. The garrison flag is raised every morning at Reveille, but on this day, September 14th, 1814, its presence has special significance. So the flag did yet wave, not because it was held up by the bodies of patriots, but because the American patriots that were there and fought in that battle made the conscious effort to preserve that flag and raised it early in the morning in complete defiance of the British bombardment. At that point, after 27 hours of fighting, the British ships did move on further down the coast, and eventually they would make their voyage back to the United Kingdom, where they would never return to the United States again. And then we'll talk about the aftermath. Yeah, very, very simple, you know. Total casualties 29. So United States right here. Yep, so United States right here, look, 4 killed, 24 wounded, 0 missing or captured. United Kingdom, 0 killed, 1 wounded, 0 missing or captured. That is the total aftermath of that. You've got a lot of here. So it was a failed bombardment of Fort McHenry. They banned the last assault on Baltimore, etc., etc. So Francis Scott Key, this is an interesting one. So you will notice here, American lawyer Francis Scott Key held on a British warship for a prisoner negotiation during the frightening siege, feared that the large flag flying over the Fort McHenry, so he knows that the fort held. The relief and awe and he feels inspired him to write a poem, Defense of Fort McHenry, which obviously will become the Star Spangled Banner, the song, which is later to be the tune to the Anacreon of Heaven, renamed the Star Spangled Banner. The song officially becomes the national anthem of the United States in 1931, and until then, it was largely the battle hymn of the Republic, or God Bless America, I think, or My Country 'Tis of Thee. So those are the facts. The other thing that I would like to talk about here, anyway, Francis Scott Key was not actually there to negotiate for the release of prisoners. He was there simply for one prisoner, and that was his friend. And I let me find the name. American sources, the National Constitution Center, Francis Scott Key was not held prisoner aboard a British ship during the bombardment of Baltimore. He was actually on his own American troop ship during the battle, and he was not alone. He was with fellow lawyer John S. Skinner, the US agent for prisoners of war. And they sailed from Baltimore on September 5th, 1814 to an American cruise ship and headed down Patapsco River, hoping to meet the British fleet somewhere in the Chesapeake Bay. They were on a mission of mercy to negotiate release of elderly Dr. William Beans. So it was actually just the release of Dr. William Beans. It was not a mass release of prisoners. It was simply just for one man. He was a non-civilian combatant who had been taken prisoner by the British as they departed Washington, D.C. After burning the White House, the Capitol and other government buildings in revenge for the US burning of York, so current day Toronto, on April 1813. So yeah, that's very interesting. So he also didn't draft it on the back of an envelope. He actually wrote it on a clean sheet of paper using pen and ink. So that's interesting to know. But those are the primary misconceptions about the story of the Star Spangled Banner, as you've never heard it before. I hope you guys can appreciate that I've done my research on this. I'm not coming from a position of sort of British pride, because actually I'm very proud of my American family. I'm very proud to be moving to the United States very soon, and I'm very proud to one day call myself a fully fledged American. So there is no sort of British anger towards the United States for this, and this is not a biased history. If anything, I would love the story to supposedly, as you guys say, be more impressive, but I personally think the story itself is incredibly impressive. The facts don't need to be skewed to make this story about bravery, heroism, and so on and so forth. Just because less men died than we are told in this video does not mean that the sacrifice was not immense and impressive, and it does not mean that all 1,000 of those men defending that fort, or 1,001 if you include their leader, were not willing to die for that cause. So impressive nonetheless. In my opinion, the real story is more impressive than the fictional story that we are told by this pastor. So guys, thank you very much for listening to what I have to say. Again, I'm probably going to get a lot of hateful comments regarding this stuff, so I hope you guys can appreciate that I am really genuinely coming from a place of American love and nothing malicious at all. So I really hope you guys have a great day and you enjoyed this video and you enjoyed what I have to say, and I hope to see you on the next video, guys. Have a fantastic day.